All right, so in this segment, we're going to discuss the four basic types of malfunctions that you are likely to encounter with your handgun. We're going to discuss a failure to fire, a stovepipe, failure to go into battery, and a double feed. A couple of notes up front. You've likely heard me say in other videos or segments or other instruction that your initial grip from the holster should be your last grip. The adage I like to say is the first grip should be your last grip that you have for the entire fight. What I mean by that is from the holster or from whatever start ready position you begin at, that initial grip should be solid, and you should not have to adjust the gun in your hand through the entire engagement. This includes if you have a slide lock or tactical reload, you should not have to modify your strong side grip, as well as best as we can help it during fixing malfunctions. So keep that in mind. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is, as I'm just demonstrating these or as we're practicing them, I want you to conceptualize that you encountered this in the wild. I'm going to demonstrate it, as I always do, at full speed and then break it down into the chunks or the segments so you can myelinate it better. But if we start from an administrative start position, for example, I know the gun has this X type of malfunction, then I'm not setting the brain up, I'm not myelinating the brain to recognize and execute as I would like you to do in that critical event or whatever you want to call it. I don't want you to have to apply any conscious decision making. If it goes click instead of bang, I want you to implement the fix. If that fix doesn't work and under further examination we realize we have the double feed, then we're going to apply the fix for the double feed. A few things that could be the root cause of this. It could be something with your gun. It could be magazine. It could be ammunition related. The thing is, guys, we're not going to psychoanalyze the gun and figure out what is wrong with it at this point of the day. We're just going to apply an immediate fix. So as we begin our discussion of malfunctions, there's two that I want to introduce early on, especially since this is a baseline educational or baseline instructional video series. I usually don't cover these in anything from intermediate to advanced classes. We only focus on the next segment, the next chapter in this series. But I would be remiss if I did not cover hangfires and squib loads. In the NRA basic pistol or their basic curriculum, they discuss the protocols for a hangfire. If we are on target and it goes click instead of bang, according to the NRA, we don't know, is this a hangfire or is this a dud? Therefore, we need to maintain the gun oriented at the target for 30 seconds. If nothing happens in 30 seconds, then we unload the gun and we inspect to see what was going on. Mechanically, for a hangfire to occur, the way you can envision this is that the firing pin hits the primer. Either the primer has a delay before it has the spark that sets off the round, or the firing pin hits the primer. The primer does have a spark, but the gunpowder has a little fizzle before it goes boom and pushes the projectile out of the barrel. This is why the NRA in their basic curriculum says keep the muzzle oriented downrange for at least 30 seconds. If nothing occurs after that 30 seconds has elapsed, then you clear the gun, you inspect to see what's going on. Since most of my instruction is geared towards defensive use, I do not want you in the fight for your life to maintain your muzzle pointed at your threat for 30 seconds while waiting to see if it goes fizzle and then bang. Since this is baseline introductory level material, I want to include hangfire as one of the things to consider. If you're firing an old antique, curio, or relic firearm, especially if you're using old ammunition you don't know the condition of it or how it's been stored, who loaded it, then you may need to be very mindful of this. By and large, I have never personally experienced a hang fire. I've never observed a hang fire, and I don't know anyone who actually has. I'm not saying it could never happen. Safety is your responsibility, so take it for what it's worth. But in the fight for your life, I'm not going to condone somebody keeping their muzzle oriented for 30 seconds without having another round in there and trying to re-engage the threat. Okay, so I think that is enough about hang fires. Next, we're going to talk about squib loads. Squib loads are likely the most dangerous type of malfunction that you could encounter, because if you fail to recognize the signs and symptoms of it and you continue firing, you could have a catastrophic failure of your firearm. Catastrophic failure will define as it could come apart in your hand, which is why we always wear eye protection while shooting. While squib loads are exceedingly rare, they do occur. I have seen 3 squib loads in my life. 2 of them were reloaded ammunition where the person who was doing it didn't have the quality control that they probably thought they did. They didn't recognize what was going on. The gun came apart. The other one was actually on a range using factory ammunition, and a student had a squib load. It went bang, bang, pop, sounded like a cap gun, stopped the student from shooting. We inspected, and sure enough, the projectile was lodged in the barrel. So what causes or what constitutes a squib load? Typically, when we say squib load or squib round, it implies that we have a live primer, a bullet seated in the round, but there was no gunpowder actually put inside the cartridge. Or there was just a touch of gunpowder put in, but not enough of a charge to give it enough energy or oomph to push the bullet out the muzzle. Just the primer going off will generate enough force for the bullet to come out of the case and then go into the throat or into the rifling of the barrel. Therein lies the issue, because if you have a plugged barrel and then a live round gets loaded behind that, when you fire that live round, there's nowhere for it to go. All that compressed energy from inside will rupture the barrel, it will damage the firearm, and sometimes it will just come apart. Hence why we need to be able to recognize the signs and the symptoms of a squib load. Once you've been firing for a little bit, you'll get to know the feel for when a round is going off. You'll feel the recoil, you'll hear the sound of the report of it going off. With a squib load, because it's typically just the primer, you'll hear a pop, but you won't hear the normal volume of boom of the round going off. You also will not likely feel any recoil whatsoever. So when you're firing, you need to be in tune with that. If you're going bang, bang, and it goes pop, you need to take your finger off the trigger and immediately stop shooting. If we're at the range on a range day, that's too easy. Lock and clear the gun if it's a semi-automatic. And then once we have our wits about us, we can disassemble it. And then all we have to do is take and look through the barrel and see if it has an obstruction. We will cover here in a minute how to fix it if you do have an obstruction in your barrel and no other obvious signs of damage. The other thing that you may notice is sparks coming out where they shouldn't be. With a semi-automatic, it's less likely you'll notice this, but definitely with a revolver, you have a little gap between where the cylinder is and where the forcing cone or where the actual barrel starts. You may see sparks fly out the side of that is not typical with your normal string of fire. For this demonstration, I'm going to load 3 live rounds so you can hear and see the recoil of the gun going boom, boom, boom. And then the next round is going to be one that I loaded intentionally as a squib. And then we're going to have a dummy round right behind that. So, dummy round, an intentionally created squib, and then 3 live rounds to begin with. So as you observe this demonstration, I want you to note the sound of the gun going off and the energy having some recoil on the gun with the first 3 live rounds, and contrast that with the lack of sound, or just the pop rather, of the primer only for the 4th one, which is the squib load, as well as almost or 0 recoil energy, and also be watching to see if there's any difference of sparks flying out of wonky places with that squib load. So that was just the primer going pop. As I try to rack the slide is stiff, probably because that round is still stuck right there in the feed ramp. As that round ejected, note that there is no projectile in the one that I loaded as a squib. If we just inspect the chamber, you'll see that there is nothing visible. I can put my pinky in the chamber, and when I look in, I don't see anything wonky. So as I load that dummy round almost lets it go into battery, which tells me that if I had a little bit stronger crimp on that squib load I created, it probably would have had enough throw inside of the rifling to allow that dummy round to chamber. It would be that next round, if that was a live round instead of a dummy, that would have caused the catastrophic failure of the gun. So you'll note with a revolver, this is referred to as the forcing cone. There is a little bit of a gap between the cylinder and the forcing cone. You may see some sparks come out of there because there's no place for that energy to go. I'm going to have 3 live rounds, and again followed up with a squib load. So with the revolver, we can actually see the obstruction in the barrel. Because there was just a primer, it had enough oomph to unseat the bullet. The hazard with this is, with a revolver particularly, if I had more live rounds in the cylinder and I had continued attempting to fire, As it rotated, that next live round would have caused that catastrophic failure of the firearm. Also keep in mind that if it's just a primer and no powder, you're only going to see a little bit of smoke coming out of the cylinder. You're not going to see sparks. Next, we'll stage this again with just a tad bit of powder in there, so you'll see the sparks come out, but it doesn't have enough oomph to actually leave the muzzle. All right, so next we're going to head up to the table and we're going to demonstrate how to remove that obstruction from the barrel, making it to where it's safe to continue firing.